Iran went into political panic mode after Trump tightened negotiations, maintained military pressure around the Gulf, and forced Tehran to show exactly what it was trying to hide. On Wednesday, May 27, 2026, Trump put the regional demand on the table and pushed for the expansion of the Abraham Accords. And he made it clear that any agreement with Iran cannot come as a reward for those who threaten Israel, use militias, and try to push the United States out of the region. What does Iran want to hide? Why the threat if negotiations are still ongoing? How did Trump turn the pressure against the regime itself? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward and no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. The Iranian threat came at a time when Tehran is trying to project an image of resistance to the world. The Ayatollah said that American bases would no longer have a safe haven in the Middle East and tried to rally Muslim nations against the presence of the United States. The statement sounds harsh, but it reveals the regime's central fear. The statement was released amid tension after American attacks on targets in southern Iran, and while diplomats were still trying to keep the path to an agreement alive, Trump did not try. He treated the crisis as empty talk. He pushed Iran into an uncomfortable choice. Either it accepts real limits or bears the cost of escalation against the world's greatest military power. Tehran knows this. That's when surrender starts to appear, not as a public ceremony, but as a political gesture. The regime rails against Washington, but seeks an economic way out through negotiations. Tehran showed the image because it needs to produce fear. It needs to shore up its domestic base. It needs to show its allies that it can still threaten. But locking onto a target is not winning a war. Showing a video is not bringing down the American strategy. It's military theater used by a regime that knows the next mistake could be costly. The Strait of Hormuz has become another piece in this dispute. The Revolutionary Guard stated that 25 or 26 vessels passed through the region in 24 hours. Under the Trump administration, Trump's pressure was not only on the military side. He also tied the crisis to regional normalization. By advocating that nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan join the Abraham Accords, Trump put the Middle East to a public test. Anyone who wants real peace needs to stop using Israel as an eternal excuse to maintain political blackmail. The proposal irritated governments, exposed resistance, and generated silence in important capitals. But that's exactly the point. Trump forced everyone to show their position. No one feels comfortable when the question moves from nice speeches to concrete commitments. Pakistan rejected the idea, other nations avoided a direct response, and Saudi Arabia maintained its old condition tied to a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Trump brought diplomacy out of the shadows. Instead of letting each government say one thing in public and do another in private, he pushed everyone to center stage. This is unsettling because it breaks the old game, where Iran threatens, armed groups advance, allies hesitate, and Washington pays the bills without demanding structural change. Erdogan also showed up attacking Netanyahu and trying to position himself as the voice of the Muslim world. This helps to understand the scale of the dispute. Trump is pushing for a pro-Israel regional architecture, and leaders who thrive on ambiguity need to react so they don't lose political ground. Harsh words about Netanyahu don't alter the main calculation. It shows that American pressure has shaken up the board. Those who previously used strategic silence now need to take a stand. And the more these leaders shout, the clearer it becomes that Trump struck a nerve. Normalization with Israel is the political nightmare of the Axis, which depends on permanent tension. Gaza became part of the dispute in another way. The fund linked to the so-called Peace Council, managed with a World Bank structure, was reported as empty in its official account, despite billion-dollar promises. The left uses this to attack Trump. But the real question is another. Why pour massive amounts of money into reconstruction without firm guarantees, without clear disarmament of Hamas, and without legal certainty? If the money comes in without control, it becomes fuel for the same machine that destroyed Gaza before. Trump understands that reconstruction without guarantees is a blank check. And a blank check in the Middle East usually turns into political ammunition against the West's own allies. While Tehran threatens in the Gulf, the United States also shows that Trump's response doesn't have to be an uncontrolled spectacle. Southern Command confirmed attacks against vessels operated by designated terrorist organizations on drug trafficking routes in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific under the direction of General Francis Donovan. Trump uses selective force, cuts off logistics, targets criminal structures, and sends a message to any group that thinks it can operate under the cover of chaos. Iran understands this method. That's why it talks tough. Tehran knows that Trump doesn't need to announce everything in order to act. The Iranian regime spent years using Western patience as a shield. With Trump, the conversation changes because the White House doesn't accept treating provocation as political folklore. If Iran threatens the American base, the cost goes up. If it tries to control Hormuz, accountability becomes clear. If it uses the militia as a proxy, the connection becomes more visible. If it asks for financial relief while threatening Israel, the contradiction becomes ammunition against the regime itself. The historical part helps to understand why this pressure works. In September 2020, the Abraham Accords were signed at the White House with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, opening a new phase of normalization with Israel. Later, Morocco and Sudan also went down that path. That was a strategic defeat for Tehran because it showed that the region didn't need to remain hostage to the Iranian narrative of permanent war against Israel. Now, Trump is trying to use the current crisis to push the same logic forward. Iran perceives the risk. If more nations normalize relations with Israel, the regime loses one of the political weapons it has used for decades to mobilize allies and justify its influence. Other nations have already shown that external pressure can break regimes that thrive on threats. Muammar Gaddafi's Libya agreed to abandon its weapons of mass destruction program in 2003 after years of sanctions, isolation, and fear of becoming the next target after the fall of Saddam Hussein. It wasn't a nice speech that changed Tripoli's calculation. There were real costs. The difference now is that Trump is trying to push Iran toward a diplomatic surrender without having to sell weakness as a deal. He wants Tehran to understand that maintaining threats, militias, maritime blackmail, and nuclear ambition will have a political, military, and financial price. North Korea also serves as a warning. Whenever Pyongyang manages to turn threats into easy concessions, it repeats the cycle again. It promises dialogue, launches provocations, demands relief, and preserves the core of the problem. Trump knows this logic and tries to prevent Iran from copying the same playbook. That's why the talks can't be just about easing sanctions and pretending there's peace. It needs to address regional behavior, the security of Israel, free passage along those routes, and the protection of American bases. The Iranian regime wants a narrow agreement just to catch its breath. Trump is pushing for a broader agreement to change the game. Israel should maintain pressure against structures linked to the Iranian axis. Trump should use every retreat, every silence, and every financial demand from Iran as proof that the regime is feeling the pressure. Brutal surrender doesn't have to appear as a white flag. It shows when the enemy threatens but keeps asking for a way out. When they claim to be in control but try to negotiate relief. When they promise a response but calculate the cost before acting. That's exactly where Iran's panic lies. Trump forced the regime to face a choice it had always tried to avoid. I'm Milson Alves, global internationalist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.